Hi folks, this is all the fruit, and today I'm gonna be exploring the edible stuff in the little Bulgarian town of Triavna, which means we have a mix of old, beautiful Balkan architecture, less than beautiful but functional socialist buildings, and a lot of fancy private houses, most of them also built during the socialist times. And we are not going to do a lot of foraging because those are all little private gardens with high fences, and we are not in the fruit season, and there are other reasons. But let's see the quite interesting stuff we can find here. Starting out with an old pear tree. One of the locals told me before this block was built, those were houses with gardens. 60 years ago, when this woman was a child, this pear tree already existed and was already a mature tree, so we can say it's probably about, I don't know, 80 to 100 years old, maybe even older. Some of those pear varieties, they grow quite slow. I would say it's a preset, but no fruits on this one, and this will be a constant theme today. Some grapevines. This apple tree has fruits, which is very unique for this year. And the flowering quince. Around here it's an ornamental, but in really cold places like northern Russia, northern China, the Baltics, it's a fruit tree. And here another apple tree in the distance. Triavna is in the mountains or rather hills, so quite cold winters and hot summers. Some people here told me during the last 10 years they had at least one winter with minus 27 degrees, but nowadays the winters are really mild, minus 15 degrees, which would have been considered super cold for the standards of my town of Heidelberg in Germany, but for here it's being considered mild. Wow. Of course, this weather limits the stuff you can grow here. Here a big cornel cherry plant. It has a couple cornel cherries because it flowered later. Here American fox grapes, quite popular. Grapes and grapevines and pergolas are very popular in Bulgaria, but here in the hills we are not actually a wine growing area. Yes, we have a couple grapevines, but no big vineyards and stuff. And because it's can be quite cold and also wetter than in the lowlands, a lot of people like to plant those American fox grapes because you don't need to spray them, and they can grow in quite cold and even shady places. Here is some wild barley, probably mouse barley or a closely related species. Yeah, you have to be careful around this with your dog. Those are very dangerous for dogs' paws or dogs' lips or everything. And speaking of dog, here we have a crispy dock, which is a popular wild vegetable in Bulgaria. Next to it, dandelion, another popular wild vegetable. Okay, a lot of those houses are more or less abandoned because people cannot earn money here. And look in the courtyard of this house, there is a feral shrubbery of sour cherries. There was probably one sour cherry tree here, and then it was cut down, and then hundreds of suckers came up. We have a lot of those old sour cherry varieties which sucker profusely. Another American foxgrape pergola. Yeah, basically around here flower gardens are quite Triavna used to be even quite famous for it. They once even did an international symposium on flower gardens in Triavna. I mean, it was not a very big one, but still, a lot of those people used to put a lot of work in their flower gardens and even more work into their veggie gardens and orchards. But yeah, a peach, and there are even a couple peaches on this despite the harsh April frost, and the grapevine, which is not an American fox grape, and as you can see, especially in the back, it is suffering. Yeah, that's why people plant the American fox grapes. Speaking of suffering, see this fig? The upper branches are frozen in our area of Germany, this almost never happens nowadays in the last 10-12 years, but here a lot of there is a lot of frost damage to this fig. It didn't kill it, but that was more normal in our area 30 years ago. Well, in our area of Germany, in the Heidelberg area of Germany, but here is still like this. And also those people seem to like exotic stuff. A ginkgo next to the fig, and the kaki, which traditionally was rather a fruit of rather grown in Greece and Turkey, and it was introduced decades ago in the lowland areas of Bulgaria, but quite recently here into the hills. Also bananas are a very recent fancy here in Bulgaria. 10 years ago you would see them only with collectors. Nowadays they are quite a common thing. Of course it's Musa Basio, the Japanese fiber banana, which doesn't produce edible fruits here, but it seems that the base of some of the pseudostems actually survived this winter. Amazing. And more fox grapes. And the magnolia, those also became quite popular. An improved hazelnut variety, a lot of flowers. And again, the neighbors also have American fox grapes, a whole pergola. Albizia, another plant, another tree I would never see around here in my youth. It was grown to a small extent in the mild lowland climates of Bulgaria, but here it showed up for the first time maybe less than 20 years ago. I'm still surprised it grows here. More magnolias and more bananas and more hazelnuts in the background. Oh, here somebody seems to be growing an improved dock variety. Yes, some people grow it as a vegetable, but most would rather collect it in the wild. Here quite a big cornel cherry plant. Cornel cherry is native to the area, and improved varieties are being grown in the gardens. And the flowers must have missed the frost because it's covered in fruits. Did I mention another big pergola with mostly fox grapes? What else do we have here? A pear. Here we have a kalina, or what is it called? High bush cranberry, or cranberry high bush. It's not a cranberry, it's Viburnum opulus. It is the national fruit of Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Poland. So it might be that there is some from those countries living here. Also here lettuces and tomatoes grown in this garden, and atriplex. Atriplex is here, used to be a standard spring vegetable here in Bulgaria, and I guess it still is. Strawberries, the lettuces and the atriplex are too old to eat now. I guess they're leaving a couple of them for the seeds. Traditional socialist trash bins always used to be made of metal, because here people, well, almost everybody used to heat their house with wood or coal, and where to put the hot ashes, of course, into the trash bin. Nobody would trust some state organized heating system. People wanted to have their own stash. A lot of them still have it. Let's see. Oh, here, by the way, another very small fig. Yeah, figs are slowly being introduced into this area. 20 years ago, they were almost non-existent around here. And again, an American fox grape, topinambur, sunflower, where you don't eat the seeds, but you eat the tubers. More American fox grapes and edible daylilies. More American fox grapes. The fox grapes were not that popular decades ago. A lot of people would plant fancier grape varieties and spray them and protect them. My grandfather even used to bury a couple of his most sensitive grape varieties in the ground in the harsh winters. Here, almost everything nowadays is fox grape. Also look at the cherry plums. The late frost in April was so harsh that even the cherry plum blossoms froze. That's quite a rare thing nowadays. An elderberry shrub, more foxgrapes in the background, another flowering quince, and hops, which is used for beer, but beer is not a traditional thing around here, although there used to be big hops plantations a couple dozen kilometers away. And the cherry tree in the background. A lot of the cherry trees are sick right now. Imagine right now such a harsh spring frost that destroys a lot of the flowers, and thus the fruit trees is of course quite sad for the people, but they'll have to spend more money to buy stuff from the supermarket. But 100 years ago this would have been a disaster, because those areas in the hills never produced a lot of grain or other cereals. Actually, our cash crop were plums and apples, and my grandfather told me here, by the way, another foxgrape, beautiful roses. I don't think this is an old house, but it's made to look old. My grandfather told me how his father and his grandfather before him used to take the ox cart full of plums and apples and go to the lowland villages and exchange them there for wheat or maize in order to feed their families here. So no fruits around here means you have nothing to exchange, and the only way to feed your family is to send a lot of people to the lowlands to work for money and for food. Another old pear tree over there. This pergola, no foxgrapes here. Also, let's see what we have here. Some currant, some aronia. Yeah, those have, see, not a foxgrape, but it's getting sick. And somebody did a little bit of effort, sprayed only the sick leaves with copper sulfate. But the leaves which are not so sick, they didn't spray them, only the sick part. Yeah, you had to do this with all the grapes which are not American fox grapes, and that's why most people switch to fox grapes. Also here raspberries, growing quite well in the mountain climate, and some freshly planted zucchini. And again, a triplex in the background. Also, a lot of people here at the beginning used to build such tiny houses, and then later when they had more money built bigger houses. And there is an old well in front of the house. Actually, a lot of the people used to live in those tiny houses until their death, and basically built the big house for their children in order to keep them around. Usually it didn't work. Very often those big houses were empty, famously empty, while the parents were still living in the tiny old huts basically. Oh yeah, so there is some, what was it, art museum or some sort of museum here in this old historic house. Quite a nice contrast with the communist block in the background. There used to be a big communist, there used to be a small communist factory here, but since we don't have any industry anymore, the factory is almost no industry. We are still providing the not the missiles anymore. We used to have a big missile production in this small city, but we are still providing the tank munition for present wars. But most of the factories are gone, including this metalworking munition style factory here. Mallows are edible, so is sonkus, so is the wild compass lettuce, so is the Syrian hibiscus, so actually even the young tendrils of the hops. But despite us being always relying a lot on foraging and growing stuff in our gardens, none of those things were eaten around here except the mallows to a very small extent. Edible daylilies. What, the sun is burning like crazy. Need to find some shade. More flowering quince. And here, this time, for a change, the foxgrapes are not growing on a pergola, they are growing on a communist block. Very good idea, actually. Birches are, of course, a very traditional ornamental tree in all of the ex-Soviet republics, because A birch, the birch is the national tree of Russia. Also, all the conifers used to be quite popular in socialism. Here, the laurel cherry, it's actually native to those mountains around here. But I have the impression that it was introduced as an ornamental on a large scale only recently. It grows wild in those mountains, but it was not too favored in older times. Did I mention the fox grapes in the background? Now in June, the wonderful smell of the linden trees. Here is a big one. We used to forage the flowers a lot for tea. So around this time of the year, linden flowers would be one of the main things to forage around here. Our river, it's a nameless river. Here in Triavna, we call it the river of Triavna, but 20 kilometers downstream, or 10-15 kilometers downstream, they call it the river of Drianovo, in the town of Drianovo. So yeah, a river which doesn't actually have an official name because you cannot decide which town it's named after. Very rich in fish. As you can see, it's full of fish. It was always forbidden to fish here. And in my youth, like in the late 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, we had long years of drought, and it was very unfortunate that they coincided with the poor transition times from socialism to capitalism, where people were growing their own food and drought was a big problem. This river was often less wide than a meter and just a couple centimeters deep. Now it's big and full again, which is good. Full of fish, full of water. That's a very positive thing. However, see those big buildings in the background? This was a big textile factory. So here, the river was still nice and clean. But 100 meters further down, it was basically dead. There was nothing alive in this river. And it was like this river from the fairy tale, which changed its color every day. When they were dyeing the textiles red, the river was red. When they were dyeing them blue, the river was blue. When they were dyeing them green, the river was green. When they were dyeing them yellow or pink or white, the river was kind of a undefined color because those colors were not strong enough to give it a strong color. But yeah, strong red, strong green, strong blue, and of course basically devoid of life downstream from here. Very sad thing for me, but of course it brought money to the town. But now it has changed. The factories are closed and the river is nice and clean again. I wouldn't drink from it, but we used to always to bathe upriver. Now you can also bathe downriver with a certain risk of infections, but it's not as deadly as it used to be. It's very interesting that the Bulgarian canon of ornamentals was always very restricted. And even after 18 years or 17 years in the European Union now, it hasn't changed so much. We have here Acer negundo, we have American red oak, well, the albicias and the magnolias, they are new, especially to the mountain areas, but I think they existed in the lowlands even before. Here we had cannas and all the other standard flowers I know from my childhood. So in 40 years almost nothing has changed. A couple conifers in the background, a catalpa and a red cherry plum, and so on and so on and so on. It's really strange that, yeah, we are now in a common European market, but people still grow the same ornamentals they grew 40 years ago. At least they are taking some care of the parks and gardens now. Here in front of the old cultural center in the 90s, everything looked pretty bleak. There was a big construction site here with a pool full of frogs. It was fun, but not really attracting too many tourists. Basically, tourism is nowadays the big business here in the city. Also, of course, producing tank ammunition and otherwise working with the forest, like mostly producing firewood for half the Balkan Peninsula for the richer countries, and also doing a little bit with, doing still a little bit of furniture and other types of lumber, but mostly firewood. Also here we have a Taxus baccata, a yew, one of the most toxic plants in Europe. It's also native to the mountains around here, but very rare. Cana edulis, by the way, very popular even in socialist times because, red, big red flowers. Every part of the plant is edible as long as it's still tender enough and not treated with pesticides. Horse chestnuts, also very popular for landscaping in Bulgaria since about 100 years. Actually, Bulgaria is one of the very few countries in Europe and the world where this horse, the standard European horse chestnut, is native. Not to those mountains around here, but to the mountains 100 kilometers to the east. One of the new introductions is the sweet potato. I wonder if they have good sized tubers. A lot of the ornamental varieties have actually big sweet potatoes growing down there. The sweet potato is not a potato, and you can eat every part of the sweet potato. Well, with the potato, every part which is not a tuber is poisonous. Tourism has decreased, and most people cannot place me. Some know I am a native, most think I am a tourist, so a lot of looks. Drinking fountains used to be very common in socialism, and before that, and even through Ottoman and famously Roman times on the Balkans. Few are left because the coffee shops also want to make money, but this is one of them. Unfortunately, no local spring water. This is water. This is normal tap water here, but at least it's free and it's on the street. And right now it's really hot, so good for us. Here there is a really amazing tree. I remember this tree from when I was in kindergarten. This is Magnolia grandiflora. People who have been living here for a long time say they don't remember this thing ever flowering. But even the fact that it survived here, oh my god, and people staple stuff to this. Can't anybody tell them that those staples are hurting this rare tree? Now Magnolia grandiflora is not a big problem to get. There is one here in the park and one in a house 50 meters from here. But this tree grew here in a time when the winters were like minus 30 something degrees. Very harsh winters, and the evergreen Magnolia grandiflora is not supposed to be able to survive such winters. As a little kid, I was always so intrigued with, well, the tree was also smaller back then, how well it grew here in the mountains. It was one of the most amazing trees I've ever seen as a kindergartner. I always wanted to see it when we came to town, and it's still alive. It must be 50, 60 years old now. Amazing. Tell me how this thing managed to survive in the cold Balkan climates in the last century, because nobody would have predicted this. Here we are basically in what little is remaining of the old capitalist center of Triavna. So probably buildings from the late 18th and early 20th century. There is not much left here, by the way. Behind the rose, a new Magnolia grandiflora, and of course fox grape behind it. Yeah, but this street was basically built. Yeah, the houses were mostly built in the early 20th century. Not many places in Triavna where you can see this architecture period and style. A lot of small shops in town, but not a lot of clients. And those grapes in the background, you guessed it, are not fox grapes. Here is the old church, which might be up to 800 years old. Very low building. During Ottoman times, when the Muslims ruled, you were not allowed to build tall churches. So this architecture is quite typical of older Bulgarian churches, and around such churches you can often find interesting or old fruit trees. But right now I just see a lot of good-sized magnolias. I see something. A hanging mulberry, an ornamental variety, a black fruited ornamental variety of the white mulberry. Yeah, they exist and they are quite common, and even those hanging ones are quite common, but I don't know if they were common when I was a kid. I would have remembered them because firstly you can hide underneath, secondly I'm sure we would have liked to try to swing on the branches and get our butts whooped, and thirdly of course it has fruits, maybe less than another mulberry, but it has fruits. So I think those are maybe a more recent introduction. The trees don't look very old, and I don't think I played under those as a child. I totally would have remembered that. Oh, by the way, if you wonder why there are so many wooden beams inside those walls, those are as earthquake protection. They put those wooden beams, which of course would rot away after a couple hundred years, as earthquake protection in those walls. But I mean, since the walls were, most people wouldn't use mortar or plaster or stuff like that, but would just use mud for the walls. The mud wouldn't survive much longer than the wooden beams, so the beams made no big difference. When I was younger, on the back of the church there was a full-blown orchard and also a veggie garden. It was basically like a house garden. I don't know if it was the house garden of the Pope. Yeah, around here every church has a Pope. We are not like the Catholics, they have only one. But it used to be a veggie garden, and they still have a couple mostly young fruit trees. The diversity of fruit trees in this area is not very big, like plums, pears, apples, cherries are the common fruits around here. Remember, this is cold mountain climate, and of course more or less public fountain here. Oh, speaking of the timber, apparently they introduced a very noxious fungus to this church some time ago with new timber, I guess with beech timber, and now this fungus is crawling up the walls and even infecting neighboring houses, so people are really scared about this fungus. I was in the church a couple days ago, but I don't go in there again. Firewood, somebody around the church is heating themselves with firewood, and this little house was rented by a teacher from this school, the big building in the back. This is school. He was a teacher a couple hours a day, and the rest of the day he was a blacksmith and a coppersmith. Made a lot more money smithing than teaching. In Turkish times, Triavna used to be a big handicraft center because the architecture was not so successful here in the mountains, and later the communists put a lot of those crafts here in those little shops, and it seems that there's one of them, the leather working workshop, is still intact. All the others are closed. Okay, somebody apparently wanted to scare me. What is this here? Let's see. This is Calendula vulgaris. This is a replacement for saffron. You can use the flowers as saffron replacement. You can eat lamb's quarters and amaranth, but despite people growing atriplex, a close relative of lamb's quarters, nobody foraged lamb's quarters in the wild. Not fox grapes in this case, but other grapes. I guess they were planted before the fox grapes took over everything. Again, an orchard, pears, cherries, more beautiful old houses with grapevines. Let's walk around, maybe we'll find something interesting. Oh yeah, this pear is grafted on top of a quince, quite a common practice. See here, the quince is putting up some suckers, and here some more. But higher up, it's not a quince anymore, it's a pear. There are pear varieties which are traditionally grafted on quinces. And also around here, at least from socialist times, those small lanterns are quite typical. I wonder if they was typical even before socialist times, if they are really traditional. Oh yeah, lots of beautiful roses. This is a really old one. Rose petals are edible. And of course, here in Bulgaria, we are famous for as the world's biggest producer of rose oil and rose water. There used to be a small-scale production of rose oil and rose water in Triavna, but it's long gone. Here a couple more mulberries, some hanging cherry in the background, which could even be some sort of choke cherry, and here nice old grapevine on this old historic house. Mint, a couple different types of mints were grown around here and others were foraged from the wild. Mint is of course one of the best spices and herbs that can happen to you, and actually there are two different types of mints here. This one, Georgian, this was traditionally used for cooking, like not for teas but for cooking dishes, and this here should be something different. Yeah, this is definitely something different, but I don't know if it's traditional. Basically around here we use mint for cooking savory dishes, but we use thyme for tea. So basically when I came to Germany and started eating Italian and other Mediterranean foods which were spiced with thyme, the spaghetti and pizza taste to me like tea. But when I drank mint tea, it tastes to me like Bulgarian savory dishes. Was quite confusing because we use different mints with very different flavor for teas, but we use this thing which smells similar to the Western mints for savory dishes. So yeah, very confusing for me, little child. I don't even think that the bell tower on top of the church was allowed in Turkish times. I have the suspicion, I didn't read about it, but I have the suspicion that it was added after the independence. Before that, the churches were supposed to be low and inconspicuous so as not to offend the Turks. Here is one of the traditional shops with the goods would be behind those things, and they would be opened. They would be opened on when the shop was open. Yeah, old linden trees. Also a public toilet. It's not on the main street, so that all the tourists don't find the public toilet but have to go into the coffee shops and buy stuff there in order to go to the toilet. But of course the locals know where it is. Yeah, but if you ever come to Triavna, now you know. Triavna is considered by many to be the most beautiful town in Bulgaria. I don't know, I partially grew up here. It sure is a beautiful town, but probably for me other towns will be more exotic. Here, by the way, one of the oldest Bulgarian schools in the country. We always say one of the oldest schools, but basically other people had schools in Bulgaria thousands of years ago, but it's one of the oldest modern era Bulgarian schools in the country. The only thing I remember from the school is that corporal punishment was a big thing here. And no, this was like 100 years before my time, 100, 200 years before my time. In my time, corporal punishment still kind of existed, but it was on a heavy decline. But back here, I can tell you, this school was not there wasn't a big difference between this school and the prison. This is the most famous clock tower in all of Bulgaria. It was built so that all the hundreds of workshops here in Triavna didn't make their people work longer than allowed. And now the beautiful architecture has been left, and one of the first clocks in Bulgaria also. And on it grows, you guessed it, an American fox grape. This is the old bridge, or the crooked bridge. Yeah, no, crooked in Bulgaria doesn't have in Bulgarian doesn't have a second meaning. This is the old bridge left from the old times. Yeah, remember, here the river was sometimes less than half a meter wide. And look at it now, 7-8 meters wide and full of fish. Also, of course, a funny detail and a funny anecdote. This little jar here was for the people from the neighboring town of Gabrovo to wash themselves from their dirty deeds before they entered Triavna, which is stupid because most of the old town was on this side. So They couldn't wash themselves here before entering Triavna. But the people of Gabrovo fire back, no, it's from the people of Triavna to wash themselves before they start their journey to Gabrovo. We used to have a lot of town rivalries like every other place. Sour cherries, cherry plums, and you guessed it, fox grapes. This is the tourist street with the souvenir shops. And you guessed it, this is not a fox grape and it's sick. And of course all the traditional drinking fountains. Oh, wood sorrel, tasty and edible. Monstera deliciosa. We had one in our living room in Sofia, but they didn't know it's a monstera. My family called it a philodendron, which is a very similar looking relative. But if they had known that monstera can theoretically produce good fruits, they would have been thrilled. More, you guessed it, fox grapes. My grandfather, he got fox grapes almost 40 years ago, but I think back then they were not really the dominant grapes around here. But more the grapes you had to spray. However, this grapevine here looks at least 40 years old. More fox grapes. None of the really ancient grapevines is fox grapes. This one here could even be up to 80 or 100 years old. And in the background, a nice old pear tree. We're gonna see an even bigger one soon. Hello, kitty. Kitty, 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 kitty. Kitty, 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 kitty. Oh yeah, timber always used to be one of the main businesses around here. So wood carving workshops, there used to be masses of wood carving workshops, and there are still a couple. And I guess a lot of those souvenirs are still hand painted in Bulgaria, although we are quickly transitioning to made in China. Speaking of the devil and devil's best friend, kitty, 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 kitty. Kitty, 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 kitty. And the electricity box is covered with, you guessed it, painted grapevines. Those are not fox grapes, but I think they are one of the other really ancient varieties here, which usually you don't spray. And although I suspect this was made locally, but it's still globalized style. Hey, kitty, 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 kitty. In my youth, I would have never been able to play with 3 cats on the street because, unfortunately, boys would hunt them, beat them, throw rocks at them, burn them in the trash cans, or simply collect them to sell them to the Vietnamese workers in town for meat. Cats, in my youth, if they were not quick enough, they were toast one way or another. Now, a different generation, less than 100 meters, I was able to pet 3 cats already. That would have been impossible back then because those 3 petable cats, they wouldn't have survived a day around here. Here is something interesting, a traditional candy workshop, and a lot of these were made from local fruits. Let's buy something. Здравейте! Тук може ли да направим едно клипче?
Ами не ми разрешават.
Не ви разрешават. It's Monday, so after a moderately busy weekend, everything has calmed down here. Although I kind of guessed that I would have less people would have looked at me filming on a busy weekend. Oh yeah, communist time monuments everywhere in Bulgaria, of course. At least this one was made from nice white stone and not from concrete, which was all too common back then. An old cornel cherry tree as high as a 2-story building, and a pergola with, you guessed it, fox grapes. Some creativity in using the old hollow tree trunk. Also, in my time this wouldn't have worked. Kids would have kicked those things around, and very soon somebody would have taken them for firewood. The pieces of wood, not the kids, obviously. We were not that deprived. And of course, fountains, fountains, fountains everywhere. Actually, it was considered a good deed back then to build a fountain. Like if you were a rich guy, you would commission some builder to build this for you. But even in my time, basically, you just took like 1 or 2 feet of pipe and a bag of cement and would go somewhere in the garden and catch some little trickle flowing down a little rock, and then you would make with the cement and with the pipe you would make a little drinking fountain, and you would be remembered for this. So Daskalova Tekeshte, I think this is the most famous antique house in Triavna. Well, antique means most probably it's 17th, 18th century. I'm not here just to show you the house, but the beautiful fruit trees. Look at this ancient pear tree. This is a vodnik pear, a pear which was used to make mostly drinks, very low alcoholic drinks. They didn't even intend them to be alcoholic, but they turned out very low alcoholic because no preservation, but like 0.5%, 1%. The people from this museum told me that this tree is most probably 200 years old. You can totally believe it. I mean, this is a big 2-story house, and this thing is much, much taller than this big house. So yeah, I can't believe that it's 200 years old, and I'm glad that it has been left like this and nobody ever got an idea to chop it down. Got the permission to just film in the courtyard. Here again another fox grape, and of course everywhere orchards, apples, cherry plums, a lot of cherry plums. Back then not many people would have planted cherry plums because cherry plums are like a weed, they grow everywhere. Very useful tree and very useful fruit, but you don't need to plant it. What people planted were the blue plums. However, now I can tell you that this is a blue plum and this is a cherry plum. They have almost no fruits. Actually, I discovered one cherry plum that survived the April frost. Do you see it? Here it is. Wow. And here on this apple tree, one apple has survived the late frost. Only one? Come on. Can you spot more in the clip? No, only one. A walnut tree. Walnuts were of course a very important nut as a staple food, and also for oil production. Also the timber was very important for wood carving, and the poisonous leaves were used for disinfection, like for chasing away moths and stuff like that. The other ancient fruit tree, which could be over 200 years old, is this cherry tree. See this huge old house, and the cherry tree is several times taller and really thick. Let's go closer. By the way, those are, you guessed it, not fox grapes. Yeah, look at this cherry tree. Because it's so, well, it is quite healthy despite losing the tips of a lot of branches in the recent dry years. It is very healthy, it is very tall. That's why you don't notice how big it is until you approach it. This is well over a meter thick. This is much over a meter thick. A meter 20 maybe, meter 25. So this is a gigantic tree, and because all the branches have dried back a little bit, if it recovers, which I think it will, I mean it has already more or less recovered, I think after 10 years you won't see a lot of damage from those droughts, and it will still look like a young and very alive tree. I would like to snack a daylily and then snack on it, but nah, not here in the museum. Buxus, very popular here in gardens for landscaping. It's an evergreen thing you can use very nicely for hedges, or you can let it grow to big old sizes, and then it even produces very small very small scale, but very high quality timber, almost like ivory. And I was so surprised it's not even native to any part of Bulgaria, but it's still so popular here. In the areas where it's native and also in Western Europe where it is grown a lot, a bug has decimated and basically destroyed most of the populations and also most of the planted plants. But around here, I guess it's too cold for this bug, and there are no big populations, so those things still look very healthy. Also here, look, everything was pretty defensible back then when the Turks could always attack. So there are those little slits everywhere where you can look out and also shoot out, and also here a couple of those little alcoves where you could store stuff like your bullets and your powder keg and stuff. By the way, one of the ornamental berberisses, Hematocarpa probably, the fruits unfortunately are not one of the good quality berberisses. Yeah, they've started spraying poison here. Pretty sad. Well, this was one thing they didn't do so much in socialist times, because poison herbicides, they were reserved for agricultural land. Nobody had money to spray pesticides here, and also enough people had goats and sheep, even here in the urban center more or less, that they would basically graze on all those plants and keep them under control. Back then also nobody would weed whack the weeds anywhere, because the goats and sheep took, well, first we didn't have the technology, and then the goats and sheep took care of that. A feral mulberry. Mulberries were grown here for over 1,000 years to feed the leaves to the silkworms, and of course feed the fruits to the people. This is definitely not planted, but feral. And despite not being too old, it has a hollow stem and liquid is coming out. And also look at that, if you think those are all olive seeds, olives don't grow here, but on the other side of this wall, there is an old cornel cherry bush. We have a lot of these little pedestrian bridges. Until a couple decades ago, we also used to have a lot of hanging bridges. They were common here for hundreds of years. The ones I saw in the late 20th century were made from metal cables, but people described them here for hundreds of years, and I guess back then they were probably made of hemp. Some people say the Balkan parts of Bulgaria, they are basically like the Amazon rainforest. People have a lot of those hanging bridges. This here is, you guessed it, not a fox grape, but this one on the other side is a sumac growing here. Oh, where's the kitty? Kitty, oh, the kitty is down here. Nah, not coming down here. You got yourself into this. You are getting out yourself on your own without any help. You yourself and yours. Well, rus or sumac, this is probably Rus tufina. Now it's flowering, but the fruits of this little tree, that can also be a shrub, once you grind them up, they are like sour powder that tastes basically of vitamin C. Quite pleasant. Underneath this abandoned nightclub, in the shade, there are the flowers of brambles or blackberries. They are, I think we will have a very good blackberry season here, but I'm not gonna see it. Also the flowers of the yak are edible, and if you are lucky, they're even tasty. Not bad, but let's see the aftertaste. For now it tastes good. This here has a flavor of peas with a long E. Now it has a bit of an unpleasant aftertaste. Those here are, you guessed it, fox grapes. Yeah, they are really much more common right now. Back then, people would have taken the time to spray their grapevines in order to be able to cultivate grape varieties which were perceived of higher quality, but now over 80% are fox grapes. They need no care except you have to prune them before they take over your yard. Those here are, you guessed it, fox grapes. And those here are, you guessed it, no fox grapes. However, those right behind them are fox grapes. Back in my time, such a garden would have been a standard. Oh, another fox grape and another one. Everybody had veggie gardens and everybody had chickens. Also, everybody had like 2 or 3 pigs and a couple goats. Beans, tomatoes, purple beans back then, carrots, onions and zucchinis, cucumbers, saturea, lettuces which are already quite tall, strawberries, thick fava beans and raspberries, and here a black currant. The fox grapes flowered earlier than the other ones. Look at the size, the other ones are flowering right now. An aronia, and here some not wasabi but horseradish. Well, basically everything you buy as wasabi is horseradish anyway, so you can call it wasabi. And potatoes behind the wasabi. An old mulberry tree. See, it was, oh, hi kitty. Oh, 2 kitties. What were you 2 little love hearts doing here? Well, quite an old mulberry tree. It is pruned at a height of 3 meters. This might have still been from the time when silkworm production was active here. And it has quite a lot of fruits, maybe because it's so close to the river, the frost didn't hit it so hard. However, they are not ripe yet. What are you doing, kitties? And kitties. Another traditional thing in front of this garden. Oh, this might be the house of my old teacher. That's why they are, of another old teacher. That's why there are so many traditional things here. They paint, they whitewash the trunks of the sour cherries. And they have sour cherries and the sweet cherry as street trees and the mulberry. Yeah, a lot more trunks were whitewashed back then. It protects against pests and also it protects the trunk from strong insolation. It serves as an insulation against the insolation. Insulation comes from island, it isolates something. Insolation comes from sol or the sun. It puts light on something. So yeah, this white stuff paradoxically diverts the light and thus the heat from the bark. More communist monument, and you guessed it, no fox grapes. Wow, no fox grapes for the 2nd time. No fox grapes for the 3rd time. And nice tomatoes and cucumbers. A lot of tomatoes. Yeah, here everybody used to make so many tomato preserves, including my grandfather. And those potatoes were planted very early because they're already drying up. A lot of cherry trees, a lot of different grapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 locations with grapes here, and only one of them is a fox grape. And the sweet cherry trees, look, this one is sick, and so is this. Oh, and more grapes here. No fox grapes, but other ones. Hey, kitty, 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 kitty. Yeah, we are back near the old church. I think I gave you kind of an impression what fruits and veggies and other plants you can expect in a Balkan mountain town in late June. Tell me what you think about everything I showed you in this video. Apart from that, stay tuned for a lot more fruit videos from the incredibly beautiful and usually also quite fruit-rich city, well, little town of Triavna in Bulgaria. And of course, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.